Every year, we assemble to discuss the crisis we are facing. Every year, we commit to make efforts for a more universally enforceable international law. Every year, we prepare a draft resolution out of our sheer commitment for a better world. In the last decade, we have witnessed crises of varying degrees of intensity and nature. And I believe today we are standing at a juncture where we must ask ourselves, why are the efforts not bearing fruits? Are we not trying hard enough? Are we not committed enough? Or are we not concerned enough?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have all gathered here today to discuss on the agenda at hand and devise solutions to global issues. The delegates here shall be discussing on reviewing the UN Charter to make international law universally enforceable by establishing a world parliament. We hope that the global community works in unity to support the United Nations cause of peace. I take this opportunity to welcome you all to this session of the UNGA 6th Committee Legal of the Model United Nations at the 22nd International Conference of the Chief Justices of the World, with the powers vested in me as the Secretary General. For this session of the Model United Nations 2021, I, Narayani, declare the conference open. I would also like to introduce you all to the Chairperson, Ms. Riyask Parashari, and Vice Chairperson, Ms. Anjali, for this session to carry on the proceedings.
Delegates, we have already established the quorum for this session. Proceeding further, the floor is now open. Delegates who wish to put forth their views may raise their placards. Delegate of Iraq, Delegate of USA, Delegate of Bangladesh, Delegate of UK, Delegate of France, Delegate of Iran, and Delegate of Australia. Delegate of Iraq, you have been recognized.
Peace cannot be sustained by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. Iraq itself has adopted a new law to help the Yazidi survivors of ISIL atrocities, which included mass executions, forced conversions, and violence, targeting thousands of Yazidi women and girls. International laws have been there for a long time now, but how effective have they been? For a law to be upheld, it must have a defined legislature to interpret it. Unfortunately, the subjective interpretation of international laws has led to an overall lack of efficacy. We strongly believe in decentralization of UN, reformation of its financing such that it reflects on its capabilities. Last but not the least, UN should vary the veto. We believe that no nation should have such an autonomous authority. Iraq urges the global community to come together, hold hands in unity, and work for a better, safer, and more just world for us all. Thank you.
Delegate of USA, you have the floor for 60 seconds.
We are on the verge of a global conflict, and the root cause is an ineffective international law. Being merely a statute, it is less equipped to handle global conflicts. Therefore, it is the need of the hour to make transformative amendments. First things first, what makes an international law ineffective? Selfishness, lack of central enforcement mechanisms, and the fear of loss of existence at a global level. Russia is not taking its nuclear disarmament seriously, while USA has been an active party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty for 50 years. But nothing could have better ensured solidarity than the USA joining with Russia in extending the New START Treaty for another 5 years. This would provide the breathing space needed to consider how to promote stability and future arms control measures in the increasingly complex and challenging international security environment that we are now facing. The United Nations has kept war at bay since 1945, but now the times are changing and we must act before it's too late. The establishment of a world parliament is the requisite for the establishment of peace and harmony. Thank you.
Delegate of Bangladesh, you may proceed.
What greater form of patriotism is there than the belief that Bangladesh is not yet finished, that we are strong enough to be self-critical, that each successive generation can look upon our imperfections and decide that it is in our power to remake this nation into more closely aligned with our highest ideals. Bangladesh has time and again sought global attention to the Rohingya crisis. The mass exodus of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh in 2017 has caused friction in the two countries' bilateral relations. Stronger international action will restore the relations between the two countries. The Bangladeshi government and UN agencies are working closely to deal with the issues that cripple us. We as a country are pained to see the plight of countless women, men and children leading their lives into oblivion with little hopes left at the end of the tunnel. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman once said, and I quote, "I have given you independence, now go and preserve it." Unquote. So I ask, how difficult it is to make an efficient and enforceable international law. I ask how difficult it is to unite and work in concurrence, striving for a better world. Thank you.
Delegate of UK, you have been recognized.
Nelson Mandela once said, and I quote, "The collapse of good conscience and the absence of accountability and public scrutiny have led to crimes against humanity and violations of international laws." Unquote. Respect for international laws has always played a key role in my country's work. However, there are several examples in international affairs of unresolved disputes and breaches of international laws that are never formally adjudicated. Thus, UK stands for resolving international disputes peacefully by setting up a world parliament that interprets and enforces international laws equally on all nations. Thank you.
Delegate of France, you have the floor for 60 seconds.
For years, the United Nations has been able to prevent most of the grave crises, but in the last decade, things seem to be going beyond control. This calls for an immediate reform of the UN structure. The non-binding nature of the UNGA resolutions has drastically decreased the global accountability towards international law. Mr. Chairperson, France believes that the ideals of equality, liberty and fraternity are imperative to be globally implemented, for which we propose some reforms to the UN Charter. The establishment of a world parliament with one nation one vote in its truest sense, and establishing a strong centre of power ensuring adherence and accountability. Thank you.
Delegate of Iran, you may proceed.
The world of 21st century is overflowing with conflicts, and the world needs the United Nations now more than ever. We signed the JCPOA in 2018. Iran's compliance with it is verified by the IAEA. Despite Iran's verified compliance with the deal, the United States unilaterally withdrew, without citing any concrete evidence against Iran's violations, and subsequently reimposed all US sanctions on us that were lifted by the accord. We suffered the consequences of ineffective functioning of UN during the Iran-Iraq war, which left over 1 million Iranians dead. We find it imperative to assert here that the United Nations needs to be and must be reformed, for which we propose the formation of a World Parliament. Thank you.
Delegate of Australia, you have been recognized.
The delegate of Australia would like to begin by asserting my country's inclination towards a common international law. Australia is a part of the 7 core international human rights treaties, which shows our commitment and resolve. My country would like to extend its full support for the formation of a world parliament with an inclusive international law and a differential application. One thing that must be taken into account is the territorial integrity of each nation. We are a part of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the Kyoto Protocol, and several other international treaties, and our government has always worked in consonance with the same. Australia is a peace-loving country, and we have always tried, and we always will make efforts towards achieving sound international relations and a better society. Thank you.
Delegates who wish to address the House, please raise your placards. Delegate of China, Delegation of Israel, Delegate of Saudi Arabia, Delegate of Nigeria, Delegate of Russia, Delegate of Brazil, Delegate of India. Delegate of China, you may proceed.
Nations often view international law as a mere tool to strengthen their global position. But growing global interdependence has made one thing clear. One cannot view oneself in isolation with the world. Mr. Chairperson, at this juncture, the Chinese delegation asks, member states like France are the producers of arms and ammunitions, one of the largest in the world. On what grounds do they proclaim world peace? China proposes the establishment of Global Enforcement Agency to cater to the need of making international law universally more enforceable. Thank you.
Yes, Delegate of France.
The delegate of France wishes to seek the right to reply.
Granted.
Madam Secretary General, we witnessed today that France was baselessly alleged of initiating wars by supplying weapons. We wish to remind the House that France has not waged any war since 1918 and wishes to preserve peace. The arms trade is a sovereign matter and the dealings are conducted between the governments so that they do not lead to any non-state actors. Thank you.
Delegation of Israel, you have the floor.
It's been 76 years of the formation of United Nations, but we ask, how united we actually are. Israel has frequently witnessed the violations of international laws, and the persistent defiance of these laws highlights the ineffectiveness. The primary reason why these laws are not enforceable is self-seeking interest of sovereign states. The international laws can be made more effective by the formation of World Parliament with equitable representation. It shall represent and protect the interest of all communities, countries, and social groups to provide an effective mechanism against social oppressions or encroachment of human rights. Thank you.
Mr. Chairperson, Israel has suffered the global non-compliance of international law for years and still has risen beyond all challenges. 15 Arab League members and 10 of OIC still do not consider us as a member state. We face international isolation, humanitarian issues, and as if it was not enough, trade threats. Is it acceptable for nations like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia to mete out such a treatment to Israel? We urge the global community to strengthen the international law via strengthening the UNO so that nations like us can live in peace. Thank you.
Delegate of Saudi Arabia, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for recognition. Saudi Arabia has supported the recent agreements with Israel, reflecting an ongoing incremental shift in our approach. In today's beleaguered Middle East, Saudi Arabia is perhaps the most stable Arab state. We have, from time to time, collaborated with other states for the region's progress. Though we do not have any diplomatic relations with Israel, Saudi Arabia has never intended to isolate Israel in any manner whatsoever. In 2005, we ended bans on Israeli goods and services. In 2015, we were offered Iron Dome technology by them. And in 2016, we even initiated talks of academic engagements. Saudi Arabia has and always will stay committed to such regional and global growth. Thank you.
Delegate of Nigeria, you may proceed.
The international law suffers with a lack of a central enforcement mechanism, and human rights law is no exception. The international community is made up of states which are protective of their independence and sovereignty and have never agreed in establishing effective procedures for the enforcement of the international law. It remains true that most rules of the international law are very difficult to enforce. To varying degrees, most countries tend to respect, or at least wish to be seen to respect, the principles of the international law because they do not want to be criticized. Nigeria is a signatory to CEDA, CERT, CRC or AC, and has done everything in its capacity to draft domestic policies in adherence with the same. However, certain nations like Pakistan or Afghanistan are still in violation of such multilateral agreements which reflect poorly on the status of women in their nation. Nigeria proposes the establishment of a world parliament as the most probable solution to enhance the enforceability and efficacy of the international law universally. Thank you.
Delegate of Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Although an outcome of extensive deliberations, international laws suffer limitations. Sanctions are seldom effective, and those mentioned in Chapter 7 of the UN Charter are meant only for rare situations. Russia believes in the huge potential of the United Nations to help avoid a new global conflict by ensuring mutual cooperation among nations of the world. Russia proposes the convening of a world parliament as the foremost measure for a comprehensive consideration of the issues that concern the global community. Thank you, Chair.
Delegate of Brazil, you have the floor for 60 seconds.
Climate change, poverty, inequality, and social injustice are the issues crippling global progress. For such issues, international laws have been framed from time to time. President Bolsonaro recently reasserted Brazil's commitment to the Paris Agreement, presenting a nationally determined contribution under the same. For any law to be effective, it needs to fulfill all the criteria which makes it a law. But unfortunately, in the case of international laws, it's just the opposite. There must be a body that interprets the laws, and Brazil urges for the creation of a world parliament. Thank you.
Delegate of India, you may proceed.
Mr. Chairperson, the most prominent issue which India is facing today is Pakistan's long-standing policy of sponsoring terrorism. Yet India has risen. Despite being the principal destination of Pakistan's nefarious export of terrorism, India has always advocated the policy of constructive engagement. India is a part of developing world, but we are ready to share our modest resources. And hence we support formulating international code of law and setting up of world parliament. And for that, let us work through international partnership, pursue an inclusive global development, and seek for more habitable world. Thank you.
Dear esteemed members of this conference, this year we urge you all to draft an action plan on behalf of all of us and people from world over addressing issues that concern us all and unite in striving for a better world.
Having said that, we conclude this session with immense hope and wishes for a more just, peaceful, and harmonious world. And now, with the powers vested in me as the Secretary General for this session of the Model United Nations 2021, I, Narayani, declare the Model United Nations closed.